Hello, my name is Dave Lewis, and I am the host of Cinemallennials, a podcast where myself and another millennial watch a classic film that we haven't seen before, ranging from the early 1900s to the late 1960s, and discuss its significance and relevance in our world today. On today's episode, I talked with actor Derrin Stull, who picked 1928's The Man Who Laughs. You know, when we were all kids and some of us, including myself, dressed up as what we were told were the classic Halloween costumes? You know, like the Mummy, Frankenstein's monster, Dracula? Well, our main character, Gwynplaine, should be held among them, as The Man Who Laughs built the aesthetic foundation and stage upon which the Universal Picture horror film series, its monsters, and the later horror genre as a whole starred. Directed by German expressionist Paul Leni and starring horror actor progenitor Conrad Veidt, alongside the very first Scream Queen herself, Mary Philbin, The Man Who Laughs follows Gwynplaine, a man who was horribly disfigured as a child, and is sentenced to live his life with a permanent smile, due to his father's failed rebellion. His life is both cursed and blessed in childhood, as he saves a baby girl named Dea, who is blind, and both are then rescued by a kindly philosopher, Ursus. They grow older, fall in love, and live happy lives despite the crowds that cruelly mock Gwynplaine, until someone unveils his secret past. So sit back, relax, and watch the smile that inspired one of film's greatest villains, the Joker. Welcome to the show, Derrin. What year were you born? What was your first film you saw in theaters? And what are your favorite films at the moment?
Well, I was born in 1993. My first movie that I can remember seeing was Batman and Robin, with Joel Schumacher and Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Great
And
movie to start out with.
yeah, great one to start out with. As a kid, it was great. Now,
Oh,
not so
yeah.
much. My movies that I'm really liking right now, I want to say, I don't know if this even counts, but like Hamilton on Disney Plus, I think I've
Okay.
like consumed like 20 times. I know that's like a play.
Wow.
I loved that. I love I feel like I don't have any current favorite movies. I feel like I'm always going back to like Star Wars, like an
Mhm.
old Batman film. I tend to kind of like action and adventure and things like that. So I don't know if there's anything recent that has stood out to me. Um, maybe as we talk, I'll think of it and I'll blurt it out.
Right, that's fine. I mean, it's funny that you keep mentioning Batman. Before we get into questions about the film,
Yeah.
did our main character remind you of someone within our zeitgeist?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
Okay.
And I think
Who,
when
pray tell?
oh, the Joker.
Hey, yep.
Yes. Dude, I think when you asked me to do this and you sent me the list of movies to pick from, The Man Who Laughs like kind of stood out to me. And I think if I look at the text, I was like something about it. I was like, I heard of this before, but I never watched it. And I honest to goodness did not realize that this would ultimately be what the Joker was based off of. So watching it was very, very cool. Um, and there are just so many things about this movie that I really like. So we could go so many directions on like
Oh yeah.
things that I picked up on.
This this movie is by far my favorite silent film, if not one of my favorite silent films. It
Yeah.
just so much about it. It's a brilliant film. But yeah, Bob Kane and I can't remember, you might know the other creator of Batman saw this film, loved this look, and they when you look at the very first comic, it's basically directly lifted Conrad Veidt's face. It's amazing like how much and the staying power of this film, and this is where I heard about The Man Who Laughs first. I saw that I randomly, I think it was on Twitter or something, where someone posted a trailer. So last year, a trailer went out around the world, like by Flickr Alley, and they do a lot of like classic restorations. And I saw this trailer and I was blown away. When I was a kid, I love these Universal Pictures monster horror series monsters. Like I said in the intro, I am a big fan of the Mummy. I dressed up as a mummy as a kid, and I dressed up as Frankenstein as a kid too. So these movies were later inspired, and they directly used a lot of elements, especially the scenery from The Man Who Laughs. It's the same exact set designer as The Man Who Laughs, and it's basically this massively influential film within our zeitgeist and within Hollywood history, but not many people know about it, or not many people have seen it. It's only it's only talked about in small circles, like small film circles. And I was just lucky enough to see it, pop up on my Twitter feed, which is like one of the things that's like really beautiful about film Twitter right now. I would have never seen that unless I like went out and pushed myself to see new movies, to see older movies, to see something that's off the beaten path.
No, yeah, I mean, I feel like for me, I feel like a really terrible Batman fan because I used to really pride myself on like how much I knew about Batman. Like as a kid, it was like I said, it was the first movie I ever watched. I believe, and I used to have this like fact straight. I believe I had about 500 action figures, Batman, all the villains.
Wow.
I had like 3 of the Batcaves, like every Batmobile vehicle, every Batplane. And I was really surprised that like I never knew about this film and like how even just being an actor, like how influential that was and Connor's performance as Gwynplaine. I mean, I was very surprised that my passion for Batman did not lead me to find really the prototype of this character who is an icon. And I mean, everything he's lasted, the Joker is like really just an iconic character that really is timeless. And Batman's going to be 100 years old soon.
No, isn't that crazy?
It's crazy. But man, I'm really grateful that something popped up and I watched it, and so many good things. I mean, it's hard. There's so many like things I want to like talk about, but man, it was a really great film.
You might have had a Batplane as a kid, but you didn't have a Gwynplaine.
Did not have a Gwynplaine.
I was so awful. That was awful.
I like it, Dave. I like it. Keep it in the
What inspired you to pick this film?
Well, looking at the list, the day that we were talking about this, I was running. I was on a run, so I really was looking at it while you sent me. I was running around campus at Auburn University. I was visiting my family, and I think I'm really drawn to laughter. And I went in blind. I did not know a thing. I honestly had nothing going into it.
That's great though, because I knew it was maybe about a clown or maybe about, something. And as a kid, I always loved, like I was obsessed with the Phantom of the Opera. And I was like, all right, maybe this is kind of like this looks like an interesting take on it. Like so much so I was so obsessed with it was that I went to see it twice on Broadway, and I dressed up as the Phantom one time when I went there. I dressed up as the Phantom in middle school, got relentlessly made fun of for it. But I just always liked this whole kind of idea of the outcast trying to find his love or I related to that to a certain degree. But I think with me, The Man Who Laughs, I was just so enthralled because something that was like right up my alley when I first started watching this. I was like, oh, there's a lot of history here. There's a lot of intrigue. There's a lot of heart within this as well. There's a lot of passion and joy, as well as the melancholy of it all and the German expressionist type of doom and gloom around them. This movie, I have a theory with films, is that the greats all have a few things in common, and that is they all have to have some kind of comedy element to it, as well as focusing on the serious and the dramedy. The drama of it all, not the dramedy of it all, but it is exactly what life is like. Yes, I mean this film isn't exactly what life is like to us now, but we can still sympathize with Gwynplaine and Dea's stories and what the director and what Victor Hugo, who wrote it, who also wrote Les Miserables, and The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which actually, in 1923, really inspired these types of films to be invested in and to be released in the big screen. And I think a lot of it's just basically down to someone that has this great heart, but they are disfigured in some way, and people see the outside negativity but don't see the inside positivity.
I can't agree enough. I think you touched on how timeless that sort of underdog story and how like it's still relatable today, even though that film so old, 1928, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like I think people are just now it's something, and I guess we'll touch on it more later, but I felt there are things that themes in the movie thematically that we still deal with today, and like maybe there are a lot of very traditional tropes that are very old fashioned in the movie, but still today like people want to be seen and be heard and feel loved, and maybe you don't like a body part on you or you have an insecurity about something, and I think people really crave wanting to be loved for who they are, and I think that's something that is timeless. And I think you kind of like think about these people and think they lived in a completely different world because it was
Right.
like, so long ago. But I mean, I felt like, wow, like it's nothing's changed. Everything's changed and nothing's changed all at the same
Right.
time. So definitely agree with that aspect of it.
I've seen The Man Who Laughs described as a horror movie, a thriller movie, and when you look at the promotional items for it and the restored versions of these films, a lot of it definitely trends more towards being a horror film. And that's not what you see in this film. I mean, even Roger Ebert says The Man Who Laughs is a melodrama at times, even a swashbuckler, but so steeped in expressionist gloom that it plays like a horror film. What could you classify this film as?
Yeah, so I think when I watched it, and I had this exact same thought. I was like, "What is this?" I was kind of
Right.
like, "What am I watching?" And on the outset, it's a very much a horror film, but as you watch the movie, you realize I felt like this is a romance. I was looking up some of the players in the movie and Googling the cast, and I guess Google has it as a horror slash romance film.
Yeah.
So I couldn't. I felt it was more of a love story than
Mhm.
a horror film. But there are definitely some horror, probably to the people back then too. They were like, "This is scary for sure."
Yeah. For sure. I mean, it's born out of the German expressionist movement, and we've talked a little bit about that before in the
Yeah,
podcast with M. And I really, really like German expressionism because the whole idea of it is having the turmoil or the psychological ideas that you have in your head, like the negative parts of our society, come out physically into this doom and gloom type of dark gothic setting. And I thought that was like, I mean, a lot of people assume, medieval or Renaissance set movies and, places in general are all these doom and gloom places. But it's almost like how in the movie, it's not actually like that. It's more of, colorful, it's joyous, there's full of love and heart in this movie. And like you're saying, like I completely agree that it is, and I agree with Roger Ebert, who says it's like a swashbuckler with expressionism and, romance all put together. I read something where they were saying, so it was The Hunchback, The Phantom of the Opera, and then this film. Oh, it's like kind of like a combination of all of these Beauty and the Beast type of things. And I think this film goes past that because Gwynplaine is not a monster. He really isn't. He might look like he is, but he's not. I mean, from the get-go, when you meet Gwynplaine as a child for the first time, you see how vulnerable and how compassionate he is, especially when he sees Dea's mother. And
mhm,
when he's surrounded by this doom and gloom, where there's men hanging by gibbets all over the place around his surroundings, it's snowing. He sees a dead woman and holding her baby, like
yeah,
her eyes open and everything. There's a lot about this film that wouldn't be put on film today in certain
yeah.
situations. because this is the pre-Haze Code era. But I think with those things in that, it makes it more grounded, and it makes it so much more realistic, where you see these people and they're in these terrible situations, and especially Gwynplaine, like, he has one of the worst things that he had no control over. He was horribly disfigured by these people because of his father's rebellion. He didn't have a choice in this, and he, throughout the film, constantly sees the lighter side of people, except for when he's mocked and laughed at, because although he is an actor, he doesn't want to be a clown.
It really showed Gwynplaine, like, as a kid, like you're saying, that vulnerability. And I think children know how to love inherently, and I think people are inherently good, and I think life goes on, and we have these like circumstances that scar us on the inside, or physically things happen to you, and it makes you cold and it scars you a little bit. And I thought this movie was such a beautiful expression of how Gwynplaine, it was like physically, like, his mouth was carved open
Right.
into a smile, and you can take that and like look at humanity, and how people deal with that on like a personal level, and how he chose to be loving and save that child who ultimately would become his lover. And I think it really just to so many things today that are really like prevalent, and things about us that maybe we don't want to face. But I think we could all relate to Gwynplaine for sure. If we like look down deep within ourselves, there's something that is kind of like out there but misunderstood, and maybe he's searching for love too, just like wanting love and acceptance from people. And I mean, who doesn't want that?
Right.
But yeah, I think he's not a monster. He is a regular guy, had a bad circumstance happen to him, and a bad situation, and he kind of ended up in this life. I feel like that's what I gathered, due to his smile.
A lot of villains that we see right now, including the Joker, they have these awful, traumatizing things happen in their childhood, and you were touching on this before too, is that, but with Gwynplaine, he doesn't see those things as hurdles that basically have taken him away from this life that he would have loved, and this whole thing that he would have extremely enjoyed. But he sees it as, okay, it happened, and yes, it's a negative thing, but I want to make this into a positive thing. I want to make this into someone loving me one day, someone like me loving someone else, because those people didn't love me that did that. So I want to treat those that might not love me with more love, despite them mocking me because of my deformity, or because of my disfiguration.
Yeah, I love that. And don't we need more people like that in the world right now? I love that. Like, you take those hurls, and you choose to be positive, and you carry on, and you keep going. And I think those are people that we really admire in the world. And yeah, people that just like you love a comeback story, and Gwynplaine is like quintessential. I don't know if we could find this out. We don't know. Was he maybe the first comeback story in a movie? I mean, this seems like a very, I don't know, where just you have all these odds stacked against you, and he chooses to try to do something good with his life, and still chasing his dreams, and being a performer, and just going after it.
He
In
just
spite
might
of.
be.
Yeah, I think he might be. He might be our first comeback kid.
Yeah, he might just be. And I think it's I mean, you get all of these things, you get all of these emotions and these feelings from Conrad's performance.
Yeah.
He is he is an amazing actor. Before this film, he was the progenitor of the horror picture. He was basically the very first major horror thriller called The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which is this horror film where it's a story of a psychopath that wakes up in the middle of the night and has to kill. And he plays the killer. And Paul Leni picked him up because of his performance in that film. And I think that he has that darker side, but he also has this extreme vulnerability. And he's able to use his eyes as the whole performance. He has almost no movement of his mouth because of hooks and prosthetic materials that he had in his mouth in order to get that effect of him smiling all the time. It was an extremely painful process, like a lot of those prosthetics were at the time, but you definitely can tell when he's covering his mouth with his hands, as I am now, and you just see the pain and the anguish and everything burst out into his eyes, sometimes not even with tears in his eyes. And to have that control in order to show that is brilliantly amazing.
Oh yeah, his acting really took me. Obviously, and the art of acting is changed a lot, and it's a lot more, grounded in subtlety and reality, and it is in the eyes now. And it's definitely, some people would say acting has maybe changed for not the best in terms of we don't emote as much, but I think, it used to be plays. It used to be you had to be very big to play to the back of the house. And you watch a movie now and it's like you barely see, you really just want to see it in the eyes, because if your eyes say it, then it will come across. But I think that Gwynplaine and Conrad rather did such an amazing job in those close-up shots of his eyes where he's like hiding his mouth. You're seeing that pain, and you're kind of very, very great actor. I mean, like, you can see like the uncontrollable laughter. So it was like laughing but crying but very pained. And maybe those prosthetics probably hurt him on the day. Maybe he did not like wearing them. And I wish he was alive. We could ask him, but I bet it was pretty grueling. I know the studio system back then also probably long hours, and some of those tears are probably rooted in reality. But I really love the acting style, and this is just kind of an aside. Like Dea, I really noticed with her hands, she was very like wispy and willowy, and her acted like with her ethereal, yeah, with her hands like very soft and elegant, and had to portray that she was blind, but the most elegant blind person.
Yeah, she's very angelic.
Very angelic, very beautiful. Her performance was I thought her physicality was great. And what's even more amazing is back then films were new. So there wasn't like, you couldn't go study this stuff. Like, you can kind of now, if you want to act like somebody or project being ethereal or being soft or being elegant, we have movies and movies and movies to look at. But back then there was not so much of that. Like, you really had to create that and convey that on screen, and you just probably didn't know how it was going to look until you did it, which is I have to really kind of give them props for that, because they're kind of building the plane and flying it at that point back then. So beautiful acting.
As an actor yourself, what were some things that you took away from this film that you could use in your arsenal for the future?
Ooh, okay. I believe that you can convey emotion and physicality, and oftentimes I don't really think to do that. I'm very I do it with my face. That's something that I picked up on, was like I notice really good physicality with actors that I really enjoy, and that's something that stood out. Also, Conrad, again, back to just the intensity and being able to display heartbreak, uncontrollable laughter, guilt, embarrassment,
Joy.
joy, being multifaceted in your acting, and maybe not just trying to play one emotion at a time. But he really, in some of those scenes, he really did quite a bit. Like you can really
Hmm.
feel so many things, and you could probably, I might see something that you don't see, or you're. I would say like he kind of moved like a bat, kind of
Hmm.
like shoulders hunched and like he's ready to pounce, sort of, but like very like timid. He looked kind of like a scared bat. So what did you think?
Yeah, I thought as an act now,
So,
but as someone that's done high school and like been an extra in one show, but I mean, as people can tell from the different things that I've done on YouTube and here, and I mean clearly this podcast, I've always had like a passion for film and acting, and I always watched classic movies as a kid, and it's really interesting to see. And you kind of confirmed what I thought about acting today is a lot of it's based on the subtlety.
yeah,
And when you look at films, silent films, people often describe them as melodramatic without the context of how the cameras worked back then, how makeup worked back then, and people will say, "Oh, it's heavily caked on." It's there for a reason. It's there for you to still understand those subtleties when they make those choices to be subtle, as well as accentuating the eyes and the mouth and like what is happening and how to make sure you know the difference between who's an evil character versus who's a good character, because you don't have, the white hats, black hats like how you do in westerns later on in the 50s and 60s. I think it's really like, I mean, I keep talking about his vulnerability and his like it was great that you mentioned physicality, and I think it's amazing that Mary Philbin, who plays Dea, is brilliant in this. She gets a lot of talking points about her performance in Phantom of the Opera, and is really known for that film, but I think she has a much better performance in this film. And she only really has a couple films after this and then just becomes a recluse. Her last public appearance was for the opening of the Phantom of the Opera in the 1990s, the Broadway show in LA.
nice.
And that was the last time she was the first Christine saw the last Christine.
Oh, that's
And
beautiful.
it was like a whole full circle. I just found out about that today, and it's really interesting to see why she didn't do anything more. Like that's such an interesting story why she didn't want to continue. I think it's really interesting because there's a lot of actors and actresses like that from the silent era that just didn't make it over to the talkies, didn't make it over
Talkies.
to color film. I think it really is a masterpiece. It's
Yeah,
definitely one of the unsung films, unsung masterpieces throughout cinema, and I think it deserves a better shake. I think a lot more people should watch this film because it has every cornerstone and keystone of a great film. It has laughter, even though it's a lot of times it is very dark and mysterious type of comedy, and a lot of very gothic elements to it as well. But again, there's so much heart in this movie, and I dare anyone not to feel any empathy or any feelings towards Gwynplaine and his situation.
absolutely. I did not know about Mary and her kind of becoming a recluse, and I think that's really interesting. You do kind of have some actors that kind of like get their big break, and they make their legacy, and they kind of do what they want to do, and they realize that dream, and sometimes they're just kind of finished. I think the life of an actor, and we don't know all that she probably went through to even just get those her movies that she did make,
Hmm.
but it can be a struggle. And by the time you get there and you get a chance to kind of do what you want to do, sometimes you feel like, all right, I've done it, I've realized this dream, and sometimes that's it. I really just could not get over their performances, and I actually did not know that she played Christine in Phantom,
Hmm.
so that that's pretty amazing. Yeah.
It's amazing like how these stories keep being retold. And recently there was a quote unquote remake or an adaptation of The Man Who Laughs for a French audience. But do you think that this film could be adapted to today's world in that, like, it would still be a period piece, but
Yeah.
do you think that you could see it on the big screen today?
You know what? I think if the right director did it and we modernized it but kept the heart of it, and honestly, it would have to be, I almost wanted to say, like, well, we do have kind of a modern version. I think we'd call it The Joker with
Yeah,
Joaquin
yeah,
Phoenix.
well,
It's a little, I mean,
yeah,
very, very different, but a lot of the same sort of, like, heartbreak, and he's
elements.
more dealing with internal scars, not physical, wanting to be loved, wanting to be a performer. I think
Mhm.
we in some ways, that movie is sort of a remake,
Yeah.
but I think we could do it today. I think, it might be a movie that people would wanna see. I think as an audience, the United States, we really want to see stories about authenticity and being genuine, and appreciating each other for, our positive qualities, and
Mhm.
just going deeper than surface level. I think that's pretty important, and I think that, it's something we don't see a lot of today. On another hand, I don't it's such a beautiful film, I don't know how a sequel would compare, or a
Right.
remake. I don't know how it would do with a good thing.
I don't even want like a remake. I think this film could be now with what's happening in our society and what's happening in our culture. A lot of it is like trying to understand what used to be called the other, the people that people didn't understand in society. And I think this film can bring a lot of people different perspective to see, oh, okay, like I might have not liked this person before because of what they believe or what have you, but maybe there's something behind them, behind that thing that I think is ugly that I don't really understand. And I should t- take some time to learn why I think it's ugly or why I think I'm wrong in that situation. And if I am wrong, I should learn to know why I am wrong and learn to love that other person on the other side and, treat that person as I would want to be treated.
Yeah.
This film is super important now. I mean, I think if you did do a rehash of it, I would still put it in that period because I think it's still relevant to today, obviously, like I'm saying, but I
Yeah.
think you need to have it a little grounded in that period piece as well. And with the way that period pieces are going, I'm a massive fan of period pieces.
Yeah.
And with things like The Favorite being a really popularized and uh, critically loved film. I think you could totally do something like this today. And I mean, it would be appealing to horror film genre like junkies. It would
Yeah.
be, really applicable to what is happening today. And I think it's interesting that you say it's basically the Joker. I myself, like I said before, I'm not a horror fan. I'm not like a big thriller. A lot of this thriller guy, this kind of stuff gets in
Uh-huh.
my head unless it's like Hitchcock.
Yeah.
So I actually left the theater. I think I told you this like when I first saw it, and I was just so freaked out. But I can definitely tell by reading it, and I'm definitely gonna watch it eventually with the
Yeah.
lights on in the
Yeah.
morning. Um,
Yes.
I can definitely see where that's coming from, and it's kind of like you're right. It is very similar to what The Man Who Laughs is really about, and it's about the other and understanding the other, but it's within the Joker's perspective. It's with mental health.
I think you definitely, definitely need to watch it in the morning with the lights on.
That's for
It's
sure.
such a good film, and I really think you'll actually appreciate that, having watched this movie. Oh, this is a really random aside that I picked out. There's an extra
Mhm.
in The Man Who Laughs who is a part of, like, the clown, like, he's the clown. You can definitely see a spotlight is on him, and he's always in the center. He's got the Joaquin Phoenix makeup is exactly
Mhm.
the same.
Do you see the influence this film has on filmmaking today?
Oh, definitely, definitely. I see in the the set pieces really, in the lighting design of how it'll be dark on half of the it just the way that they angle the lighting to make it very shadowy. I I really see, yeah, just a lot of like film technique. I think
Hmm.
obviously has carried over. Um, good film technique. I don't believe has really changed a lot in the history of cinema. I think
Hmm.
good film technique is good film technique, and it'll always be. Um, however, um, I feel like a lot of the mob scenes, I'm like, yep, you kind of see that today. I think I noticed a really weird thing with like the commoner, like the townspeople running
Right.
out after his like carriage or whatever. I'm like, you see that so much, like children just running after. Today it'll be just like in a movie, it'll be like kids chasing after maybe a car, or maybe a politician or someone's in
Right.
it, or you see that kind of thing.
Or running off after Gandalf for
What?
fireworks.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, you definitely see some of that. There are two specific things that I think has carried over. If you'll allow me to be a dork for a
Of
second.
course. Hey, I mean, we're doing a
Yeah,
podcast about classic movies. Everyone's allowed to
yeah,
be a dork.
boy. So okay, so I picked up on this. Did you see in the beginning where I don't know who it was, but a male character in the movie in the beginning, I think he puts his fingers in his mouth and like pulls it to make a smile. I was like,
Barklefeldro, yeah.
yes, Heath Ledger did that.
Jester.
The Jester
Yeah.
kind of opens his mouth like that. Also in the Heath Ledger Joker version, it's a carving um, with a knife,
Hmm.
to make the smile. So the mouth is being carved open.
Yeah, like the
Um,
Comfort Chicos did to Gwynplaine.
yeah, yeah. So that is a direct reference. You see, and actually, not every iteration of the Joker uses that. I
Right.
don't believe the story, or the surgically opening the mouth. I don't believe that has been used except for in the Heath Ledger version. I do. There's something else at the end of the movie where Gwynplaine is kind of hanging off of the ledge. If you watch the 1989 Tim Burton Batman movie, um, yeah, Jack Nicholson's Joker is hanging off at the end, and they're on the same thing. They're on a tower, and he loses one hand, and there's a shot in The Man Who Laughs where it kind of like
Hmm.
shows like it's a really funny way of like how it kind of shows like the camera like dropping towards the crowd, and Jack Nicholson's version of the Joker kind of meets his end. He falls off of, and if you haven't seen the
I
Batman movie in 30 years, I'm sorry I spoiled it, but you've had 30 years. So
I vaguely remember that watching on TV as a kid. Well, one of the things that I was saying, what I was thinking about with that shot was that is a Zolly. It's zooming in and physically moving the camera in and out.
yeah,
And that's like, I mean, Hitchcock is known for that within Vertigo and Rear Window. I mean, it's amazing that you're making all these connections to Batman. And even now, there is a Batman comic that is The Man Who Laughs.
this is just something like we didn't really story wise like touch on. I really, a lot of the story, one of the subplots was about Gwynplaine having an opportunity to cheat on, I guess, his girlfriend, which
Hmm.
is what I gathered from it. And there were some things that I didn't quite understand about the movie. I think what was interesting is, and you might be able to elaborate on this too. I think because the movies were silent, they had to tell a lot of the story with the title cards,
Right.
as well as tell a lot of the story with letters in
Hmm.
films. So I feel like they maybe used the plot device of opening a letter and showing you a letter to move the story forward. So
Hmm.
I noticed that as well. That was an interesting piece. But what a timeless kind of again, the movie's just very timeless. Like we deal with that kind of thing today.
Right. And I think the version I sent you, which is the version that I originally watched before purchasing like a 4K version of it, you saw the scene when Barkilphedro, who is the jester and later becomes elevated to a courtier, he he is talking to that like really long guy. You know what I'm talking about? The really
Yeah.
long-faced peasant who is one of my favorite background characters like ever. He's so funny in the way he walks and looks and reacts to things. You saw the nudity part, right? Where she's in the bath, the Duchess.
I
Okay.
did. Okay, and I was gonna like, okay, all right.
So and there's a lot of actual really suggestive and sensual parts in this film, especially when you're talking about the infidelity chance that Gwynplaine could have had, and that is because this is before the Haze Code. So the Haze Code was a was a situation where a lot of groups thought that films were way too out of control, and that became a issue later on. But before that, so like in the early 20s, there was a lot of nudity back then, and then the Hays Code came along, so it was more censored. And writers actually, which I think to a certain degree, where later films are alluding to situations and sexual acts and different things like this, I think that actually kind of strengthened writing in film later on due to that, restriction with the Hays Code. And even it says like about Gwynplaine, like he just wants this whole idea, like he even says in the movie, this shows me that a woman could love me that can actually see me, and I don't care that she wants to sleep with me. I want to be with Dea anyway. Like that's the first thing that comes to his mind. He's just so good and pure. He's like, oh, she likes me. And then the whole thing falls apart, and due to different really great subplot that I really like. The whole Jacobite revolution that it's very loosely based off of. Outlander fans, you're going to like this one too. When you're talking about the title cards and lettering, it is a plot device to move it forward. But also during the 20s and even a little bit before, it depended on the theater as well as how the theater that you went to operated. So during that whole time, so I don't know if the version you watched and the version I watched had the same exact music, because at that time, what happened was you'd go to the movie house, you'd go to the theater, they'd show the picture. If there was no music that the director attached to the film, they would play whatever they felt was appropriate, as well as they would have a narrator in the crowd basically reading off what the letter said or what a character said. So that's why they have those cut titles. And because I noticed that too, because most of the time it's just one thing. It's like, I mean, even in later films, it's one piece of paper and like you have the whole thing, but this kind of went into the little details of it over and over, which I thought was interesting. That it was an interesting choice to just make sure these points hit home for the audience.
Exactly. And I think I know exactly what you're talking about. I kind of felt like I was watching or seeing the same sentence like over and over and over again. And I kind of thought I was crazy. I'm like, did I watch this already? Like,
right.
Yeah, so that confirms that aspect of it for me. But man, this this is really just kind of like opened my eyes. Like I think I want to watch some more just good classic film, and there's so many good stories that like I don't know about. I feel like you just kind of know what you're born in, which is like 90s to current day, and but you can go back and go back and go back, and I think we don't go back. Like there's so much brand new, content for us to consume, and it was made in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. I mean, we just don't think to go back there. So I really thank you for like kind of getting me to watch a good movie, and I'm gonna keep it going.
Of course, great. I mean, that's what this whole podcast is about, really. As a kid, I watched a lot of classic movies for my grandparents and my parents. Wizard of Oz was one of my first movies that I've ever seen. And even after that, I would go after movies. Like in high school, I really got into classic films, and I got my first Criterion Collection movies, which was Laurence Olivier's Henry V and Bergman's The Seventh Seal. And those are still one of my favorite films, a couple of my favorite films. And I really wanted to make this podcast so people that I knew in the past or people I know now, classic films are boring, they're not interesting, there's not enough action, but there is, isn't there? Like, there is so much, especially
Yeah.
in this film too, and I think we are missing a lot of cultural touchstones that we would understand later on and really comprehend more from these classic films. Derrin, now that you've watched The Man Who Laughs and you want to watch more classic films, why do you think millennials and the younger generations should watch The Man Who Laughs?
I think younger generations should watch The Man Who Laughs because if you are a superhero fan, you're gonna get something from it. If you are a fan of horror films, like I am, you're gonna get something from it. I think you'll also get a really timeless sort of love story from it. I also think that there's it's just so relatable, and I think we've really just kind of been saying that for the last hour we've been talking. Like, it's such a relatable, like this guy could have lived today, and
Mhm.
grandparents or older people or people that are dead or historical people kind of live like these different lives, or maybe they don't feel like they were real, but you watch these movies and you sort of get an aspect of really how things haven't changed all that much. They
Mhm.
felt the same things, and movies are what we have left historically of of what people went through at the time and what was important enough for them to make a movie about. And you're gonna
Mhm.
have to read and pay attention, but it's because I sort of, like you said, I drew relation to other movies and things that I watch nowadays. I'm like, oh, this is kind of like that, or this is like this, and it it all ties together. Like, you hear a lot of people say movies, there's nothing new under the sun. It's just the same thing over and over again.
Right.
But you can go back and go back, and a movie like this is like this was the first iteration of what you would see today, like the Joker or what have you. So these movies are so important to watch. I think we got to give them a lot more respect than they deserve.
I really hope you enjoyed today's discussion I had with Derrin about one of the greatest silent films ever made, The Man Who Laughs. I really enjoyed our discussion and want to say thank you to him for bringing his acting experience and insight to the show. If you enjoyed this episode of Cinemallennials and want to watch the film we discussed, please check out my website, dlumoviereview.com, for more episodes of the podcast, film reviews, analyses, and where to purchase the film we discussed today. Please don't forget to subscribe and give us a rating, as it helps more people find the podcast. Thank you.